Hello, in this presentation we will compare QuickBooks Online versus QuickBooks Desktop. Hello, in this presentation we're going to talk about backing up data within QuickBooks Online. For more accounting information and accounting courses, visit our website at accountinginstruction.info. Here we are at the QuickBooks Online dashboard. We will be continuing with the Get Great Guitars problem. We're going to be talking about saving data and backing up data within the QuickBooks file. If we moved from the desktop version, are talking to someone who has used the desktop version, or anybody using any desktop version of accounting software, whether it be the QuickBooks Desktop or some other version, we'll get to the topic of saving data, backing up data, and restoring data. There's a difference, of course, between the online version and the desktop version in that the desktop version will generally be stored in some way that we will have control over it, most typically on our desktop or version or server, and therefore we have direct control over that data file, which is great because we then can do whatever we want with the data file. But it's also a concern because if anything happens to our server, or if that file gets corrupted in some way, then we lose the file and we'll lose the data. Therefore, in the desktop version, our major goal then is to save that information in some other location, typically. And therefore, if, for example, we have the data on our computer, we might want to save a backup version on an external hard drive and or on a cloud-based software, so that if something happens to our server, that our computer crashes or there's a fire or something like that, we have the backup in some other location and then can restore the data back to the program. That's one use for the backup data in a typical desktop version. Now on the online version, we have a different scenario in that our data is actually being stored not on our server, but on Intuit servers somewhere, and therefore they have control of the data. And that you'd think that we'd have the same concern in that their server can burn down or can be corrupted, but it's actually less likely that that's going to be the case. So that normal kind of backup option isn't there on the online version, which can be concerning in terms of losing data. But the typical way that we would lose data is probably not the same type of risk, because of the fact that it's on the Intuit server, and the Intuit server is most likely going to be backed up very well. So it's less likely that we're going to have that problem where we just lose all of our data on the Intuit server. Now, there are some other concerns and some other things that are useful within the desktop version to have those backups that we typically don't have as much on the online version. We can talk about how to kind of simulate that type of information in the online version. But for example, if we wanted to have a backup and back up something at some point in time and have a static backup in the desktop version, and then do something that's a bit of a risky type of experiment within the software, and if it doesn't work, then restore our data to where it was prior to running some kind of scenario. That's an option that we have in the desktop version that is not there currently in the online version. We can't typically back up all of our data in the same way and restore it in the same way. So if we wanted to run something like that, it'd be more of an issue. The online version also, of course, if we stop the subscription, the data typically will still be there, but we typically would need to restore our subscription in order to continue with the data. So those are a few differences between the online version. The online version, as of now, doesn't generally have that static backup. So the static backup shouldn't be a problem in that the Intuit will have the data. We won't typically lose the data because it's on the Intuit server, but doesn't give us some of those other types of things that we can do, which is basically to have that point in time, frozen in time, that point backup, so that there's a problem in the future, we can restore, to that point in time that we've have control over. Now, there are a couple things we could do in the QuickBooks file in order to get our data to an on-ground version, and that in essence is just running reports. So we could go down here and say, hey, what reports would we need to run in order to get all the data that we want backed up, in order to basically be able to reconstruct what we have if something went down in terms of the Intuit server going down, which is unlikely to happen, or if we wanted to try to transfer this data to some other software and do it in a manual process. How can we do that? Well, some of the reports we might want to have, one would be the transaction detail report. And we can go into the reports here and we type in the transaction list detail report, transaction list by date report. And if we run that report, and again, if you don't have any data in here, obviously there will be nothing here. But if we run that report 02/01/21 to 02/28/21 and run that report, then we'll get all of the activity. And this is going to be a nice report in that it gives us the amounts over here, and it gives us the transaction types that we have. So we can actually go in here and basically see not just by the account, meaning the balance sheet account and the income statement account, but by order of transaction. So we can go in here and actually see all the transactions that were input in a particular order, and we can save this information. And typically, if we wanted to reconstruct this month of information, we can basically put this information into the system. So this is one report that we can save that basically backs up what we have done for a current portion of time. If we were to run a report like this, we would probably want to run their financial statements, meaning the balance sheet and the income statement, probably prior to this time. Then save this report, which is the activity from that point in time, and then this activity, and then a balance sheet and an income statement as of the end of this point in time, the end of February in this case. And that'll give us the detail for this report. The other reports that would be useful in order to back up our data, get some of our information, the core information that would be needed if there was a catastrophe, a crash, or if we're moving the data somewhere, would typically be our customer list and our vendor list. Customer possibly more important. So we're going to say the customer list, customer contact list. If we select that item, then it'll give us all of our customers. Now, we don't have a lot of detail in terms of the phone number, the email, the address in the customers for our practice problem, but those would typically be the most important things. So this is the area where a lot of your contact information is going to be for the customer, which I would put in multiple areas if we could. Any contact information, it's probably going to be in our email information. I would duplicate it into our QuickBooks information and try to keep it as updated as possible. This is more information that would mostly be useful in order to basically back up, and we can save it as a PDF or export it. And then, of course, the vendor list would be the other. So if we go to reports on the left side and we go to the vendor list, here we have it, the vendor contact list. We'll get the same thing in terms of who we pay our to. Now, we might have less information here, but we may still want to put to our vendors the phone number, the email, and the address for the major vendors we have. Obviously, the phone bill and stuff like Verizon and stuff, we may not have all that detail too. But if we have typical vendors that we're purchasing our inventory from, so if we sell guitars, or the main vendors we buy the guitars from, and the contact within those companies are things that we would want to save and make sure that we have that information in terms of their contact information. So that's going to be the other report that will be very important here. So again, the major difference here between the online and desktop version is that the online version doesn't have that static backup that we can have on the desktop version. And on the one side, the online version is less likely because the server is very it is a high quality server on the cloud by Intuit, and probably has a lot more backup functionality than we may have on the local desktop. So it's probably less likely that we completely lose all the data by the server going down on the Intuit side. However, we still don't have some of those other kind of options that are nice within the desktop version in order to have that static backup, to freeze that information as of a point in time to have a backup file, as of a point in time that we can go back to, or to run tests with different types of backup files and transfer that backup file, possibly give it to our CPA firm or whatnot, so that they can work on the backup file. The online version, of course, if we wanted to work with a CPA firm, we could just give them access to the online version. They can go through the online version and work through the reports, but we can't give basically a static backup file as of a point in time that the CPA firm can work on without accessing our actual data in real time that we're currently working on. So there's pros and cons to the systems that we're going to be using within the cloud-based system, QuickBooks being on the cloud-based system, and the desktop version with regard to that saving data and that restoring data. It's one of the big differences in terms of how we're gonna restore our data, how we're gonna back up our data, and how we can basically manipulate our data within. Hello, in this presentation we will create a backup file for QuickBooks Pro 2018. If you've been following along with us, we will be continuing with the Get Great Guitars problem. If not, that's okay. We will be creating a backup file in this presentation. If you currently have this file's backup, you can restore it first, going to the File tab and the Restore, as we've seen in a prior presentation. We currently have the Open Windows list open here. In order to open that, we want to go to the View tab, Open Windows List. We currently have the Home page open, so if you want to see the Home page open here, go to the Company and Home page. This will typically be our default setting, what it will look like every time we go through these presentations. We are going to back up the file at this point. First, want to just mention, of course, that the backing up of the files is very important. We do want to keep a separate backup file for a couple different reasons. One is that it can save, obviously we're going to save the data in case there's a problem with the data. And we want to then save it to a different location in order to have some more security. I'll talk a bit more about that later. Another reason we want to back it up oftentimes is it's a way for us to exchange the data. We could use a backup file to give to our CPA firm or our tax preparers at the end of the year. We can back up files to help us with adjusting journal entries. Could be very useful to be able to back up and restore data. It's also just very nice to have the backup to have saved as of a specific point in time. And this is something that this type of desktop version actually has that the online version doesn't have, because the online version doesn't typically have a backup as the desktop version does, because it is backed up by the Intuit systems, which are usually backed up better oftentimes than what we could do in terms of a local backup. So you're not typically going to lose your data if you're using the online version. However, you can't really save the data as of a particular point in time, or try to stop at this point in time and see what happens if you do something, and if you get it wrong, you just restore it back to that prior point in time as easily. Because you can do that with a backup setting. So we can restore something, we can run something, we could test something out, and if it doesn't work, then we can restore the backup. We can give something to our accountant and see what they do, and keep another backup and see what the differences are once we get it back after any adjustments are made. Many reasons for the backup, but the main reason, of course, is just to make sure that we have a backup of our data. And in order to do so, we want to make sure to back the data up in hopefully a different location. I would suggest either a cloud-based backup or another hard drive that you can then remove possibly and actually change from day to day, so that the actual hard drive is not physically with the computer, or that we have multiple hard drives that we can possibly take home or put in a different location in the event that there's something like a fire or a theft that would not only take the file, but would also take the hard drive. Of course, the backup could also just back up in case there's just corruption in a particular QuickBooks file for whatever reason. Then we can back it up, and as long as we got the backup, doesn't matter where it is, we can back that up and restore it back to the location that we had the backup. Good idea to back up the file. I would do it mainly anytime I do something new. So I get in the practice of backing up the file whenever I do something new to the file, pretty much every time we open the file. but at least once a week, once a month for sure, you want to back up the data. When you do back it up, it usually will go to the same folder, and once it does, it'll kind of delete some of the older backups. So it will go through a system, the default system being that it'll create a new backup, and it'll try to delete the prior backups so that you're not taking up massive amounts of space in a particular system. Also note that the backup files are going to be zipped files, so they're not the same as a QuickBooks file. You can't open them directly. You got to restore them to open them. However, the backup files are substantially smaller because of that, because of their zipped nature, their compressed nature. So that's going to be a big benefit. Note they're still fairly large, however, and you can't usually, if you have any extensive data in your program, you still can't usually say email. The email data limits are usually lower than the size of many backup files, depending on how much data we have in QuickBooks. So that's going to be some of the options within QuickBooks. Going through the process, we're just going to go to the File tab up top, and we're going to back up the company. We want to create a local backup, so we're going to create a local backup, meaning local to like the computer, something local to the computer. It's going to not go online. You can look into the online options for backing up the information. I'm going to back it up here to a local backup, meaning, again, something that is found on our network. So we're going to go next. And then it'll give you this browse option. I'm not going to go through a lot of it. I'm going to keep the default options here, but it says add the date of time of the backup. So this is really nice because it'll actually change the file by the time you back it up. And of course, when you look at it, you want to know when it was backed up. It says limit the number of backup copies to this folder to 3. And that's useful too, because that's going to tell it when you have more than 3, it's going to say, hey, I don't want to, do you want to keep backing up to this file, or do you want us to delete the oldest one and therefore give you some more room for the newer ones? Very useful. Online and local remind me to back up when I close my computer. So that's going to be good to have too, because we do want to have the reminder on there, but if it's bugging you, then you can turn that off. And then it says select an option to verify that our company data is okay when you save. Complete verification recommended. I would go with the recommendation. Then we're going to go and browse the computer to find where we would like to place this backup. You first get this drop-down kind of format, which isn't quite as user-friendly. Once you select an area, however, it'll then go to the more familiar screen. So you actually pretty much choose the location like 2 times. So we're going to use this drop-down method first. I'm going to go to the Get Great Guitars, select the drop-down, and go to section 1. And I'm just going to put it right there, and I'm going to put it into, I'm going to select this folder. Selecting that folder, and then I select OK, and then OK again. And then it says, hey, you know, your data file is on the same hard drive as the place where you're backing it up, and that's not wise. Or in other words, we'll read the message. You've told us to save the backup copies to the same hard drive, the C drive, that holds your company file. We do not recommend this. Instead, we recommend that you save to a different drive or to a removable storage device to avoid losing the backup due to an unexpected hard drive failure. So it's telling us, why are you backing it up to the same area where you have the information? We might have a reason. I have the reason because it's a presentation, or we might be sharing it in another case with somebody else, and we might be backing it up for our CPA firm to take a look at it, or some other reason. But typically QuickBooks has a point here saying it's probably better to back it up at least to an external hard drive, that then saving the problem of if the hard drive dies for whatever reason, that's the point of the backup, that it's on a different hard drive. And then you might want to have that different hard drive to be switched out and have a different location, possibly take a few of them home and alternate the hard drives, maybe have 3 hard drives and back them up 3 times a week and take the other ones home. And in so doing, then possibly you have multiple locations in case not only the hard drive crashes, but there's a fire or there's a theft in the office and you have another backup at some other location. So we're going to go ahead and say thank you QuickBooks, but I'm going to use this location, and we're going to say save it now, and we're going to keep that as the default and say next. And then it goes to the location again, the same one it just asked you to, but in a nicer feature. So if you select this drop down, you'll see that it went to that same location, the desktop, Get Great Guitars section 1. So it's basically telling us, here it is again, here it is, this is really where you want it. Not because it doesn't agree with where we put it, because it's on the same place, same hard drive, but that's just the way QuickBooks will do it. It'll tell you to put this somewhere first in that arrows type format mapping, and then once we hit save, it'll go to this format again, and we can change the location if we want to here, and or change the name. Default name, it's going to be the name of the company, and then it gets the backup date, which is very nice. Note that the file type is a QBB, a backup file. That will be different than the data file. It'll still have this green icon here, but it'll say it's a backup. We already have, this is actually a backup too. We already have one backup here, but the actual file will be not a QBB file. It'll be a different type of file. It not being a backup, it being the file we are using. So we're going to say save that, and it will then back up. It could take a bit of time to back up, especially if you have a lot of data within the program. It is a fairly large program to back up. Once we have completed the backup process, we typically get this message saying QuickBooks has saved a backup of the company file to Get Great Guitars, and there is the location. We're going to say, okay, that is great. If we then look at the location, I'm going to select here's where we put it, and we put it into section 1. I'm going to make this a bit smaller, make this now a bit bigger. We put it into section 1, and here is our information. So here are the files. So here's the backup file that we have here. It is a backup file, and it's going to be indicated by the backup file. The file type will also say it's going to be a backup file as opposed to the actual company file here, which is the company file, and it actually says company file here. So this is a QBB file. If we were to see the extension, this is going to be the company file. If we wanted to restore this file, then we'd have to go through the restoration process. When we do go through the restoration process, then it will only have the data up to the point of this backup. Any new data that will be input after that backup time period will not be included when you restore the backup. So if you do make a backup, you do more information after that point, and then you restore the backup, it will just restore the data to the point that the backup was made. The system.